What's up guys, welcome to another phone episode. So since I did the pro mode for stills video, this has probably been the most requested video, and that is for the pro video mode. And more specifically, I think I get asked a lot, just how do I get better video out of my phone? So we're gonna go over that, and I think there's three main areas or genres or points of interest that we're gonna take a look at to help you get better video on your phone, no matter what it's for. The three categories that we're going to focus on to help you get better at video is going to be, the first and foremost, the easiest, the quickest way to do it is going to be settings. So understand the settings of the camera that you have. In this case, we're talking about the S23 Ultra. Obviously, there's going to be some things that bleed over into other cameras, other systems, but that's first, settings. These are the things that you can do to change the things that you have on your camera to help get you better video the fastest. The next category we're going to take a look at and just talk about a little bit. This isn't going to be a master course or anything like that, but it's going to be the principles of photography and light. So understanding your gear, what it's capable of, and what light does, and understanding the reasons then behind the settings. Once you know the settings, hey, we need to set it at this, we need to put this here. Once you understand why, then that's going to help you understand what you need for any given scene and just have a better idea overall for what your video is going to need. And then the last part, but certainly not the least part, is the accessories, the gear, the things, the peripherals, the things that are going to help you help the gear that you have and get you the look that you're after for whatever it is you're filming. All right, so let's just go ahead and jump right into the phone. I was going to do this outside somewhere interesting, but apparently we have another massive forest fire and my tiny little mountain town is covered in smoke and it's so bad I can't go outside right now. But for now, let's go ahead and jump in here and I'm going to walk you guys through the pro mode and the settings and all of that stuff. So hopefully after this, you'll be well acquainted with what you have in the phone and what it does and what it means and what then else you need to push a little further. All right, so we're just filming at the desk here. Nothing fancy, unfortunately. But it doesn't matter because this is gonna be everything that we need right here in the app. All right, so first things first, let's jump into some settings here. There's a couple of things that I want to change, like I mentioned, that are going to help you right off the bat. By default, the video stabilization is turned on. This is not the super steady. This is just the regular video stabilization, and I kind of like it. I keep it on. It helps a lot. But the super stabilization I find gets a little wonky, so I typically keep that off. The first thing we're going to do is go into advanced settings. So by default, this high efficiency video is going to be on. If you want to get the most out of your videos, especially if you're going to be editing them, whether it's on the phone or in a proper editing program on the desktop or whatever, you're going to want to turn on the high bit rate. And I think probably to most people, it's not going to be noticeable. The difference might be negligible. However, it is going to give you a little more data and a little more detail to help you push those videos when you're editing them and to just increase that quality ever so slightly. So then you can also turn on the HDR if you want to give your phone a little help, because the biggest problem with the phones is they really struggle with dynamic range, again, because of such a small sensor, and they do a really bad job with dynamic range. And dynamic range is the difference between the brightest part and the darkest part of the image. So if you're outside in bright daylight and it's super bright, and then you turn your head and you're in shadow, you'll notice that your face is super dark, or the part that's in the shadows are super dark. And then the part that's outside, like you might have those blown out highlights on, the other side of your head. That is poor dynamic range, and that is the sensor not handling the amount of light difference that's in the scene. So the HDR might help with that a little bit. It's not going to be amazing or lifesaver or game-changing or anything like that, but it might help you a little bit. So you can keep that on or off. All right, so those are the basic things that I change in the settings that are going to help out. So next thing, let's jump up here to frame rate. So frame rate's very important. It's how many frames per second that the camera is going to be filming. If you're trying to go for Hollywood cinematic style stuff, then 24 frames is usually what they use. So we now have UHD, full 4K, 24 frames a second, which is very nice. If you're going for YouTube, TV, a lot of YouTube and TV type stuff is actually 30 frames per second. So If you watch Marquez Brownlee, he will definitely tell you 30 frames is superior, and everybody else will fight him for it. So it's just up to you. But now what's great is that we finally have options for all of that. I actually kind of like filming in UHD 60, so 4K 60. And what I do is I do this for two reasons. One is it's going to be a little bit smoother, and two, it's going to allow me to slow things down if I want to do slow motion later. And then I'll just conform it and export it in a 24p timeline. So for all intents and purposes, it's not going to be that much different, but it just gives me that safety net of if I want to do slow motion, I can slow it down in post and then have that and then have it be smooth, because I'll slow it down to 24 frames per second, which is a 60% reduction. And that's a very nice, smooth, natural slow motion. So up here, you'll notice that this is grayed out, and that's grayed out because Samsung, for some stupid reason, will not allow us to do color profiles in anything 4K. So if we want to change that, we have to go back to full frame, and it won't even let us do it in that. It has to be full frame. Oh, it says because HDR is on. So let's turn HDR off real quick. It still won't let us do in UHD though. So see, if we're in UHD, if we're in 4K, it won't let us select that current video size. So we have to come down here to full frame to 1080p, and now it will give us these custom profiles. So if we want to tweak the tint, if I want to change and make a custom look and drop my saturation, all of that, maybe I want to make it a little flatter, drop my highlights a little bit. So this is kind of mimicking a log profile. It's not really, but if for some reason you need or want to make your own color profiles in here, this is how you can do it. And this is the only way you can do it is if you're in 1080p. And that's unfortunate. So I would rather not do that. And I'm going to switch it back to UHD 60. And I'll do all of my color grading and stuff like that, tweaking in post. I do really wish that we had log profile like the new Apple, and I think the Sony phone has it too. I don't know. I just know that it's been done in other phones and Samsung refuses to give it to us. So that's kind of a bummer. All right, so let's jump back to this 4K 60 thing real quick. So shutter speed is really important. Again, if you're wanting to stick to cinematic video, then you're going to want to stick to a reciprocal rule. And in Hollywood and traditional filming, we try to keep our shutter speed at double our frame rate. So if we're at 24 frames a second, then we want 48 frames a second, which most cameras don't have. So 50th of a second. If we're at 60 frames a second, in order to be able to slow this down properly to get a 24 frames per second, we want double our frame rate. So we're going to come in here to our shutter speed, and I'm going to lock it in at 1/125th. That's the closest to 1/120th that we get. So that's what we're going to use. I'll talk about shutter speed a little bit more in a second. So if you've messed around with stills at all, this should look very similar to the Pro mode for the stills, and hopefully maybe you'll have a little bit of understanding of photography. There's three main things you need to know about how to get the correct exposure, and that's called the exposure triangle. So there's shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. I have tutorials, separate in-depth tutorials on all three of those, so you can check those out for more details. We're not going to go super in depth. Some of them are more apparent than others. Shutter speed obviously is the amount of time that your shutter is open. That's what's letting light in. Aperture, a little less obvious, but still plausibly obvious. That's the little blades inside of the lens that open and close on traditional lenses like these guys back here. So those lenses have changing apertures, variable apertures, but the one on your phone does not, so we don't have to worry about that. So that's one thing that we don't have to worry about on here is aperture. So that leaves shutter speed and ISO. When you turn up the ISO, it's going to increase the sensitivity and allow more light. I put quotations on that because that's an oversimplified version, but basically when you increase your ISO, you're going to get more effective exposure. It's going to get brighter. The problem with this is it's also going to increase noise. So we can look at that here. I've got it on auto right now, but if we go to our base ISO, which is 50, the lower your ISO number, the cleaner your image, the cleaner your image is going to be. And that just means it's going to be low noise. That's usually what we want, but we can't always get that. Sometimes like this, I'm in a darkish environment. So without adding extra lights or changing anything else, I need to bring my ISO up. So we're sliding it up. Now we can start to see things. This phone only goes to 3200 ISO, so it's going to cap off at that. All right, so that's a real quick example of ISO. Let's go up to shutter speed. So that's the next way to control our exposure. Now, if I slide this to make it a faster shutter speed, then obviously we're going to let in more light, so it's going to get darker. And with video, you can only go so low. So the lowest we can go with video on this phone is 1/30th of a second. Anything slower than that, and it's going to get really choppy, and it's going to be very hard to deal with. So for videos, if you're trying to do cinematic videos or replicate, Hollywood or anything like that, 24 frames a second is what we use. And this can now do that, which is really cool. We want double our frame rate for our shutter speed. So if we have 24 frames, then we want a 48th of a second, which is normal on Hollywood cameras, but we don't have a Hollywood camera, we have a phone camera. So we're going to go round it up to 50th of a second. If you're in the rest of the world other than America, then you're going to be using PAL, which is 25 frames per second. So 50 would actually be perfect for that. So we're going to slide this up to 50. Now the cool thing about Pro Mode is I can lock that down. I don't want to change my shutter speed. If I know that I'm shooting at 24 frames a second, I want the shutter speed to stay that way so that I'm consistent across the board for my entire film, for the entire edit. So everything is smooth and has the right amount of motion blur that I want. We're going to leave that at 1/50th. So that means we only have two things left on the exposure triangle that we can change, the aperture and the ISO. And I've already said we can't change the aperture. So that means we have one thing left, and that's the ISO. So now, if we need to change exposure, from now on, I'm going to do it in camera, I'm going to do it with the ISO. It's really important to note that while we don't usually want a higher ISO because it makes noise or increases noise, what's even worse is underexposing, especially with the smaller sensors. So these phones have little tiny sensors, and in general rule, if you're underexposed and then you have to boost it in post in whatever editor that you're using, that's going to make it even worse. So having a proper ISO set, even if it's a higher ISO, to get more light in camera, in the field, that's going to be better than underexposing and boosting in post. All right, next up on here, up to the right, is the white balance. So white balance is very important. That's the temperature of the light that we're going to be filming at. I also have a video on white balance if you want to understand a little more how that works and what it means. Suffice it to say, we measure white balance in something called kelvins, which is a temperature unit, and it is not a degree. It is just units of Kelvin. It's a very standard scientific temperature we use for both science and for photography, videography. So we're in kelvins here. Basically, if we take it off of auto, this is saying that it thinks that 5,000 is good, but you'll notice it looks very blue. Now it looks blue because I have a blue light on over here. So let's say we wanted to balance that out. Well, what happens if we warm it up a bit and change the white balance to go warmer? So we're going higher with the numbers. Now our screen is getting a little more warm. Our image overall is looking a little more orangish. That's obviously overkill. If I wanted to back that down somewhere in there, it looks a little more natural. And then if we were to drop it and cool it off, so this would be the opposite effect. If we had really warm lights, like tungsten lights, like the old school lights that you might have in your house, or street lamps or whatever, those are tungsten, those are very warm. They're on average about 3,200 or 2,800 even. This is where you would want to add the blue in to balance that out. So for now, I'm just going to put this back into auto. So what it's going off of is there's a bright white piece right there, and it thinks that that should be white. And so it's going to base the color that it's metering off of everything else off of that. So the next thing up is we've got mics. So this is a kind of a new addition to the last couple of generations of Pro Mode, and I've been very happy to see it. You'll see over here we have Omni, we have front, we have rear, USB, Bluetooth, and Bluetooth mix. So these top three from Bluetooth, from the USB up, are grayed out. That means that there's nothing plugged in, there's no Bluetooth turned on, so we don't have access to them. If, we'll talk about this a little more later, but if we have peripherals, you know, like this guy is just a little microphone for your video or for your phone. So if we plug this in, now all of a sudden it's going to automatically recognize that. Now all of a sudden we've got USB. The cool thing is we can swap even when this is plugged in. If I don't want to use this, or if I want to change it to Omni or whatever, I can go back to Omni or the front or the rear. But if I want to put it on the USB, so now it's going to record audio. All right, so now what's really cool is it gives us gain control over here of the audio. So if it's too loud, we can bring it down. And if it's not loud enough, we can bring the gain up. So if we bring the gain up, now if you look over here to the little LR, you're going to see that spiking a little bit. All right, so that's how the mic works. Okay, so now we know how everything in the phone works, and we have an idea of what it's capable of and what things are looking like. We also know now that we have our exposure triangle dialed in. So we have our aperture set, we have our shutter speed set. Now we can mess around with our ISO. If I want a lower ISO because I want a cleaner image, like I've already shown already, if I want to drop this, like let's say to something more manageable, like 400 or something, just to clean it up the image. Well, now it's too dark. Now this is where you know, okay, I need to bring a light in. So this is where accessories and gear and all of that come in. So if I were to grab something like this, which I just had as an accent light, and I were to bring this in, so now let's brighten this up until we get something. And real quick, one last thing on here that's super important. This histogram in the top left, so by default you'll see it looking like that. If you tap on it, it will show you the histogram. The histogram is the light value in the image, so it's going to show you where all of the light is. To the left is pitch black, to the right is pitch white. So the more the histogram leans to the left, the darker your image is. So we can see that if we drop the light down, then the histogram is going completely to the left, indicating that we need to boost our exposure somehow. We bring the light all the way up and keep bringing it up. Now the histogram has backed away from that left edge, which means there's no crushed blacks. So that's good. So even on the screen, you can see if I tap in here, this little bear back here is kind of, well, he's reflecty, so that's hard to tell. But if you can't tell if you're overexposed or not, that's when your histogram is going to come in handy. Because if we have too much light, look what happens. You see the light on the histogram, it's going towards the right. That means that we're blowing out that area. That's this area of the light. So if I back this off, now there's no peaking on the right. That means nothing is blown out. That means we'll have details in all of those little highlights back there. So that's a little crash course on how to use the histogram. It's super important, and I'm very glad that it's in the phone now. All right, so that's a basic breakdown of Pro Mode for video and the settings and kind of the rationale behind all of the settings and when, why, and how you'd want to change them. Let's talk about the next thing. That's lenses. So the phones are coming a long way, and it's amazing that we have, you know, like in this phone, we have the wide, the ultra wide, the telephoto, and the ridiculousness that we're not going to talk about. But for the three main things that are actually viable and usable, we have the ultra wide, the regular wide, and the telephoto, the 3x optical telephoto. Those are the three main sensors, and having them built into the phone is incredibly powerful. However, the downside is they're not all created equal. So usually, well, always, the main lens, the main 1x sensor is always going to be the best sensor. It's usually going to be the biggest, and it's going to be the best in terms of its ability, its image quality, and its dynamic range. And typically with phones, no matter what brand you are, the ultra wides tend to suffer a little bit. So they tend to be a little bit worse. And then the telephotos kind of tend to be in the middle. That's just a very oversimplified ballpark thing, but it's basically just to give you an idea of how they're going to perform. So this brings me to the sponsor of our video, which is Freewell, and I'm very, very glad to work with them. I've used a ton of their stuff for years now, and I don't work with any company that I don't believe in and don't use myself. So Freewell sent me this lens kit, and it's got a whole bunch of really nice stuff in here. One of the questions that I get asked a lot is why, with the built-in lenses, why would we want to use any lens that, you know, from any company that's a third-party lens? Because I have an ultra wide, I have a regular, and I have a telephoto and a super telephoto and all that. Well, the first answer is there's lenses that you don't have, and that's going to be for cinematography purposes. That's going to be the anamorphics and like maybe like a macro, something like that. So we don't have anamorphic lenses, and anamorphic lenses are what Hollywood uses to give you that aspect ratio that's like wider than 16:9. That's also what they use to give you those flares, the light flares, you know, like you see in like Michael Bay movies and stuff like that. Some might consider that over the top, but that's for another discussion. So if you want a specialty lens like an anamorphic or macro or something like that, then you're still going to have third-party lenses. So you might as well have the best ones. The other reason is, even if like we've got a wide in here, they don't have a telephoto yet, but I think they said that they might be working on one for later this year that's like a dedicated proper telephoto, and I'm really looking forward to that one personally. But in terms of like, why would I want a wide angle when I've already got a wide angle? Well, the biggest reason, like I said, is your main sensor, your main lens is your best sensor. So if you want slightly better quality, then using one of these super high grade wide angles like this guy, this is going to be a higher quality of glass, and then when you put that on your main sensor, that's where the benefit is going to come in play. So you're going to have the benefit of the higher resolution most likely, and the dynamic range, and just the improvements of your main sensor, and not have to use your ultra wide, which is usually lacking behind a little bit. There's a lot of other really great things about these lenses. For starters, you saw the filters that they came with. So filters are extremely important, because remember what I told you, that you can't change your aperture on your phone. That means that when you go outside and you want to get cinematic video and you want to set it to your proper frame rate, you know, if you're filming in 4K, 24 frames a second, and you go outside and you say, okay, I know I got to have a 50th of a second shutter speed, it's gonna be super white. Everything's gonna be blown out. You can't change it unless you increase the shutter speed. That's not proper for cinematic footage. So you deal with that with ND filters. So the great thing about these lenses is they all come with threaded mounts. See how much darker that is? That's an ND64. So that's a much darker that's like putting sunglasses on your camera, and that's going to allow you to keep the shutter speed that you need even in the brightest sunlight. I did another video on these other filters. I'll show them real quick. So these are really nice. So these are the magnetic ones that Freewell makes for the phone, and these go with their case, and you can just bam, and now you have an ND filter. So if you don't have the lenses or whatever, and you want to just start out with the lenses that you have, then this is really the next step into helping you get the proper exposures and stuff like that. And then of course they're great for stills too, because you know, you can go watch the video I did on them with the stills about doing the long exposures, like with the waterfalls and stuff like that. But these can also be used for video. If you don't have the lenses, check out the filters for a start, because they're a big help into getting the cinematic look that you're going to want. Let's talk about anamorphic real quick. So the anamorphic are very different. Like I said, they are what give you the black bars naturally and give you they film in a wider aspect ratio than 16:9. And they're also what give you either those blue or gold streaks, and you can get cinemorphic or anamorphic lenses in either blue or gold for the light flares. These ones are blue, and they're denoted by the B on there. And then they'll tell you on the front the anamorphic and what it is. So this is the 1.33x. The other one that they have, I think, is a 1.55. Yeah. So the 1.55 is obviously a different aspect ratio. I tend to use the 1.33. I think that one is the best medium ground. It's also the one that's the easiest to de-squeeze for, like, I use Premiere Pro, and they already have a thing in Premiere Pro. They already have kind of a set way to de-squeeze the 1.33. If you do it with the 1.55, you got to do a little bit of math. But I'm not going to go into, there's lots of tutorials online for how to de-squeeze footage. But once you do that, once you film everything and you got your beautiful light flares and your anamorphic ratio and your natural cinematic black bars and your proper ND filters and everything, one more thing that can really help a phone is a mist filter. So this is a mist filter, and basically it doesn't look like anything, but there is a coating on it and it is a little bit opaque and it is shiny. And basically what this thing is going to do is it's going to soften your image a little bit, because the worst problem about the phones, especially Samsung phones, I think are probably the worst with this, is the over sharpening, and especially in 4K. It seems like they actually add more over sharpening in 4K than they do in other modes. That's not scientific, that's just kind of like based on what I've seen. This is going to very subtly help soften things up. It's going to help the highlights calm down a little bit. It's going to help that digital over sharpening. It's going to soften that up just a little bit. So having one of these that you can put on any of these lenses, that's going to help a lot too. The next thing that's going to help you when you're filming is the circular polarizer. So a circular polarizer is arguably the most important filter. So it looks kind of like an ND filter. It's a little bit darker, but there's usually only about a stop of light loss there. But the important thing of a circular polarizer is that it cuts through glare, through windows and water. Anything with a reflection. Circular polarizers are immensely helpful for if you're going to be filming car videos, or if you're going to be filming in like downtown areas, you want to shoot through a window, either a window of a car or a window of a skyscraper or building or whatever. If you're filming in nature and you want to, if the leaves are really waxy or shiny, like in summertime or after a rain, then filming with the circular polarizer is going to cut through that. It's also going to help saturate the colors of the greens and the blues a little bit more. If you're filming like a river or a lake or whatever, and you're getting a lot of reflection and shinies, then the circular polarizer is going to cut through all of that stuff for you, and it's going to help immensely with the look of your image. So having this kit and having all of that stuff in one go and everything you need right here in one box is super helpful. And to use these, you got to have the case though. I don't think the case comes with it, unless maybe they have a bundle. I don't know. I'll have the links below. But basically, these are very similar to the Moment style ones, where they clip in. So except they have a little bit different. They have a wide end and a skinny end, and then they have a little picture on there, and you just line it up and then you turn it 90 degrees and then there it is. And this isn't coming off. This is extremely secure. So you can run around with this and you can do whatever it is you need to do, and it's not coming off. So this is the case that comes with it, and I actually really like this case a lot. For a couple of reasons. I love their magnet. This whole thing is magnetic, as you saw with the filters clipping over it. I love that it has their lens built in, so we can do all of that stuff. The aesthetics is very nice. It's got the MagSafe on the back, so like with my Peak Design stuff, it works like with my wireless charger that I have here, and all of my Peak Design stuff for the car and all that. So this is actually a really nice case. I've been very happy with it. But you do need the case to use their system with the filters and the lenses. So another cool thing is Freewell has everything kind of like, they're developing a very nice system. And I think partly because they already had this system for their iPhones, because everybody's been developing for iPhones because it's just easier. But now the Freewell is one of the few that's really developing a whole system for Android, and I really appreciate that. Right now, I think they only have the S23 Ultra, but I'm fairly confident they're going to keep up with the newer phones, with the Samsungs and stuff, so hopefully they'll have like S24 stuff moving forward, things like that. I don't know if they're going to go back. I don't know if they're going to do S22, S21. I would think probably not. So I'm not associated with them other than being sponsored by this video, but you'd have to check with them if I know a lot of people who have older phones who are going to be complaining about this, but it's just the way it's probably going to be moving forward. It's probably going to be your best option with either starting an S23 Ultra or hopefully in the future S24 or 25, whatever. But they've got this little grip thing, and I showed this in my other video too, and this is really nice for a couple of reasons. So for one, you can move it around and you can make this really nice grip here, and that does two things. It's comfortable, but it also helps to stabilize. So it gives you a much firmer point of contact for moving your phone around and keeping it balanced and steady. So the other cool thing about it is if you put it over here to the side and then you put one of these big chonking lenses on it, like this wide angle is kind of heavy. That balances out really nicely now. So that is a big deal. And then we've got up here, we've got a hot shoe, well, cold shoe. So that is a standard cold shoe size. So like I said with the mic earlier, so we can just slide this in, lock it down, plug it in, and now we've got our microphone on the cold shoe, and it's got an Arca Swiss plate to mount to any tripod that's Arca Swiss, which is fantastic because all of my tripods are Arca Swiss for all of my big cameras and my phone stuff, and that's my preferred way. I think this thing has a selfie thing built into it too, a selfie stick, but I've never used the selfie stick part of it. I just need this grip, the lens, the mic, and then we've got a great little pocket-sized cinematography camera. You could also get like a cold shoe splitter or something like that to where it has two cold shoe mounts or a cage or anything like that. Then you can add your microphone and a light. So if you had, you know, like these little lights or like, where is it? Oh, here it is. So here's like my little Lume Cube, and I have it on blue right now, but it's RGB light. You can take this off and, you know, mount it, so then you have a light mounted if you're doing run and gun style. There's a lot of options for rigging these things up to get what you need for the shot, because like I said, lighting is super important to understand. It's important to understand what your phone can get away with and then what you need to supplement that to get the shots that you need. So like I love having these little lights, and then you've got like these Lume Cube lights. These things are super tiny. And then I've got little gels on them, so you can pop these gels off and now they're way brighter. But this is like, I've got, you know, like an orange gel if I need to warm up the light a little bit, and then I got a diffuser if I need to diffuse the light to make it a little softer. And then the same thing with like this guy, you know, the fact that I can change the color, so you could just see the color changing, and I can use whatever color I need or want to match to a theme or to complement something, product, whatever, you know. Something like this, I just have this on a little tripod, but you know, something like this, I can keep this in my pocket if I need to. I can keep it, it's always in my bag. I have a bunch of these. They're very, very handy, especially for the smaller sensors like in the phones. When it gets darker, you're just going to need more light. If you don't want everything to look super grainy and noisy, you're going to need more light. So having your own supplemental light is going to be a huge deal. All right, well, I'm going to wrap it up there. That got pretty long, but it was in depth. I wanted to make sure that I covered everything with enough detail so that you kind of have a basic understanding for cinematography, and especially with cinematography in the phones, because I can't stress this enough. You have to understand your gear and its limitations, and then that will help you understand like what you need to do to supplement to help you get around those limitations, whether it's lenses or lighting or editing tricks or anything like that. You put all of those things together and you'll start making higher quality, better videos. So if you guys have any questions about anything else, cinematic principles or settings or the accessories or anything like that, one more thing, I think with these lenses, they are kind of heavy. So if you're going to use a phone gimbal, definitely check the weight and add all the things up, because I think some of the phone gimbals probably can't handle the weight with this. But some of the smaller mirrorless gimbals, obviously those can handle this just fine. just keep that in mind. But if you guys have any technical questions about the settings or the gear or the accessories or lighting or anything about, you know, filmmaking, YouTube, anything like that, leave those in the comments below and I will definitely answer them. If you made it this far, I really appreciate it. That's amazing. I know this was a long video. Hopefully it helped. And if it did, definitely give me a thumbs up, because that and commenting are like the best things you could do for the channel. If you're looking for more and you haven't yet, you should definitely subscribe to the channel. Check out the channel memberships too if you want to get some extra content behind the scenes. Support me. It makes a huge difference and it means a lot. And we've got a pretty cool little channel members community going on over there. All right, time to wrap it up. It's chai time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.